My name is Mike Burnside. I'm a semi-retired geologist and a very long time Missoula area resident. And I'm a member of the Bitterroot Bridges Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization whose main focus is on transportation issues and river and environmental issues centered around the Bitterroot River. Our members and supporters are Missoula County residents, and this presentation is going to discuss the long-running issues around Maclay Bridge and the South Avenue Bridge project. What and where is Maclay Bridge? It's an old single-lane bridge with many people, when they think of a bridge, think of one single span. This one actually has 4 different and separate sections. It's a single-lane bridge on a 2-lane road. It crosses the Bitterroot River just west of Missoula. It was built from spare parts and repairs from 1952 to present, as parts of it washed out or failed. It's been identified by Missoula County for replacement since the 1980s. And South Avenue, the bridge location there nearby, is the long preferred replacement site. This is a photo of it from the west bank, and you can see the 4 different sections. The 3 on this side are a little harder to see because of the vegetation. This is an air photo that shows you the setting of it. This is Highway 93 and Reserve Street. South Avenue is right here. And jog up to North Avenue, and Maclay Bridge is located right there. One thing to note, and I'll come back to later in my talk, is that the bridge is located right on a big meander of the Bitterroot River, and that's significant geologically. What are the state, the Montana Department of Transportation, and county concerns with the old bridge? They term it functionally obsolete, which means it's a 1-lane bridge on a 2-lane road, so it can't handle the capacity now or what's projected in the future. They also term it fracture critical, which is an engineering term that means there is no redundancy in the engineering of it. If part of it cracks and breaks, the bridge will fall into the river, will collapse. There's no backup. They try to avoid building bridges fracture critical these days. The state has a sufficiency rating system for bridges. Maclay Bridge is rated 27.3 out of 100, very low number. And the state Montana Department of Transportation also states that 98.3 of all Montana bridges rank higher than Maclay, so it's definitely down near the bottom. It has 3 unsafe approaches, curves nearby that are accident clusters. An accident cluster is an area where there's a really abnormally high rate of wrecks and accidents that happen. The piers and abutments have unknown or conditions that are in dispute, and I'll explain more about that later. It has components that are deteriorating. It was installed so low that it won't survive a 100-year flood event. The Federal Emergency Management Agency and other flood-related agencies project that a 100-year flood would overtop the deck and wash it out. It's, as I said, a single-lane bridge. It was measured in, I think, 2013 as having up to 2,610 vehicles per day crossing it. The national standard for a single-lane bridge, the safe capacity for it is actually 100 vehicles per day, so it far exceeds what the national standard is. It's also been a long-time site of drowning deaths and accidents, and I'll talk more about that later too, but one of our longtime residents who's lived in the area nearly 50 years, he can personally recount 13 deaths that were directly related to the old bridge. There are also some concerns about delays in emergency response times with fire trucks and ambulances and the like because of the configuration of the bridge. The project process history and status is long and complex. In the 1980s, Maclay Bridge was first identified for replacement, and it was identified in each version of the Missoula Urban Transportation Plan. In 1994, because of possibility of an earmark being inserted into the federal budget by the then senators, an environmental assessment was completed and signed, and it looked at a range of alternatives. I think it might have been 16 alternatives. It came up with a preferred alternative at South Avenue, to extend South Avenue across to River Pines Road. That didn't follow through. No decision was issued because the funding went away. The delegation weren't able to come up with the earmark. In 2002, Missoula County, the Board of Commissioners, nominated the old bridge for replacement, and it's been in the MDT, the Montana Department of Transportation's off-system bridge program, since then, as being nominated for replacement. In 2006, the Board of County Commissioners, BCC, ranked it #1 priority for replacement. In 2010, the Board of County Commissioners asked the Montana Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration to fund a study to assess the need for a new bridge and to reconsider alternatives, to essentially reevaluate what was done in 1994. There was a group that was formed in opposition to the project, the Maclay Bridge Alliance, who asked for this assessment. And so in response to that, this study was initiated, and it included an alternative that the Alliance was advocating. That study went on for over 2 years, and in March 2013, it was finalized. It was called a pre-NEPA study, which actually means that it considered the environmental effects as well as looked at planning and a broad range of transportation issues. It was finalized with the state-of-the-art modeling that the state uses for all transportation planning in the state. It put out cables for monitoring traffic on all the streets in the area, and it looked at possible land development in the future, and it came up, based on that, with an assessment of the effects, and again identified a preferred alternative, the South Avenue site, the same as the 1994 environmental assessment. After considering that study, in May 2013, the Board of County Commissioners unanimously affirmed the South Avenue site as one they wanted to go with. And in October 2014, the board committed to the Montana Department of Transportation and a project-specific agreement for Montana Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration to fund South Avenue Bridge, and the county in this contract, this agreement, agreed to reimburse up to $1.4 million of the planning and engineering work spent up front if the county, for some reason, decided to cancel the project. In April 2015, the board again issued a resolution unanimously affirming its support for that decision for a new South Avenue Bridge. And in fact, all the county commissioners since 1994, I think there are about 7 of them, have affirmed and supported that South Avenue is the proper location. In 2016, consistent with the project-specific agreement, the county initiated a hiring process to look at engineering firms, and they asked our group, as well as the Maclay Bridge Alliance, to participate in that. So we looked at the credentials of all the applicants, and we and the Alliance and the county were unanimous in selecting HDR Engineering. They're a very experienced national firm of considerable size. So they began their studies. And in March 2017, a Missoula Long Range Transportation Plan came up for consideration, and it was approved by the Board of County Commissioners, including Commissioner Strohmeyer, who was relatively new on the board. He came on in 2016. And it included a provision, again, to replace Maclay Bridge. In October of that year, Montana Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Board of County Commissioners met to discuss and explain the South Avenue Bridge SAB roles, what the roles of each agency were in this process. And in April of the next year, the Federal Highway Administration sent a memo to the Board of County Commissioners on the county's role in this process, because they wanted to make sure there was no confusion. In November of that year, because of some lingering questions, the Board of County Commissioners met again with the Federal Highway Administration and the Montana Department of Station to discuss the roles and the status of the South Avenue Bridge project. Then in January of 2019, the Board of County Commissioners sent a several-page letter to the Montana Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration, again raising questions about what the board's proper role was in this process. And it had a lot of other questions as well about the process. After that, the state received that letter. They suggested a meeting in Helena, which occurred on the 13th of February 2019. The board met with Montana Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration representatives, and there was also a conference call where the public could call in. Our group participated as well as the Alliance, and discussed the roles of the agencies and some of the questions that Commissioner Strohmeyer raised. Some of the responses that MDT and the Federal Highway Administration had to Commissioner Strohmeyer was that he needed to meet with the contractor, with HDR Engineering, and discuss with them some of his concerns. So subsequently, a meeting was set up for 12 March 2019, where the three commissioners met with HDR in Missoula, and the Montana Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration also had representatives involved, to again discuss roles and consider Strohmeyer's comments. HDR considered the submittals, and it indicated that the comments did not change its position, and that it would, in its words, stand behind its work. It thought its work was solid. After a bit of time elapsed, where the board, I believe, was considering all this, they issued a public statement in the May 3rd, 2019, and also authored a Missoulian guest column that explained next steps in their term for the South Avenue Bridge. And they said that they now understood and accepted the roles and the process, which was basically how it had been portrayed by the state and the feds previously, that the county's role was basically to be to oversee HDR and see that the project met the time frames and the conditions in the project-specific agreement, but that the decision as to compliance with the environmental regulations and other issues were basically decisions that the state and the feds had the authority to make. The Board of County Commissioners, besides saying that they now understood and accepted the roles in the process, clarified that the design phase would include ample public comment yet to come, and that the design phase would be completed by August of 2020, and construction for the new bridge at South Avenue would begin in 2023. So over 26 years this process has gone on. Maclay Bridge, South Avenue Bridge project has had very robust public involvement and comment. The 93-94 environmental assessment had 4 large public meetings, extensive public comment was submitted, and citizens advisory groups were formed for the different factions involved in this process. The same thing in 2012-2013, this bridge planning study, pre-NEPA evaluation, which addressed the need for a new bridge, and again, it looked specifically at this group's concerns. 4 public meetings, citizens advisory groups, as well as separate meetings that the county and state held, where the study team, their study team, met with the different groups to discuss one-on-one their concerns. They tried to be very thorough in considering all public comment. So bringing us up to more recent times, in 2018-2019, HDR, as part of its assignment, is to also conduct some environmental studies, which they've been doing and is posted on a website that I'll mention in a minute. They've held 3 public meetings, and 1 more is planned, where they've solicited public comments. Public comments can also be made online, and they're posted online. Citizens groups were invited to participate, to send representatives to meetings that HDR specialists held, and to advise HDR and the agencies on mitigation and concerns about effects. This year, most recently, the county engineer, Shane Stack, has started a separate process that we appreciate very much. He's currently holding meetings with the bridge groups, with our group as well as with the Alliance, to try to develop consensus and what Shane calls informed consent to discuss the effects of the South Avenue Bridge and ways to mitigate any effects such as safety and traffic and things like that. These are the studies that have been completed to date. This is the 2013 planning study. It's quite voluminous. This thick appendix here are the public comments, and it also looked at over 16 alternatives. This is the 1994 document. It was an environmental assessment. As I said, it was completed and signed, but no decision was issued associated with it, but it still was completed. And there is the title page with the signatures and the dates on it of that environmental assessment. These are documents that HDR has listed, and they're posted on their website, which I know is rather hard to read here, but it's southavenuebridge.com, and all of these documents can be downloaded and reviewed. As you can see, they've done assessment of a very varied topics and resource issues, cultural resources, the hydraulics, how the new bridge and the old bridge affect the river, geotechnical and materials, the foundation conditions, the type, size, and location of the bridge that might be constructed, biological resource report, looking at all of the wildlife and resources in the area, noise analysis, preliminary roadway and traffic report to update what was done in the 2013 report. They've got a list of draft environmental documentation. There's a categorical exclusion narrative, which I'll talk about more in a minute, and form, and then also a narrative on the biological assessment of effects, preservation potentially of the old bridge, and so on. To get to the current situation and the preferred alternative, to bring your attention here, here is South Avenue. It dead ends right here. North is toward the top. These red lines depict the current route of traffic over the old bridge, which is located here. This is North Avenue. This is Clements. This is Woodlawn, and this is Humble. The current traffic comes in on South Avenue, and the majority, according to traffic monitoring, the majority of the traffic that crosses Maclay Bridge comes in on South Avenue, and it splits here right in front of Target Range School. Some of it goes on Clements, some of it continues down to Humble, a little bit of it goes up Woodlawn, comes back to North Avenue, crosses Maclay Bridge, jogs back along the river to here where it hits River Pine Road. This is River Pines Road. Goes on up here to the Blue Mountain Big Flat Road. The traffic, current traffic, as you can see, impacts 5 different streets: Clements, Woodlawn, Humble, North, and River Pines. The preferred route, which is preferred in both the 2013 and 1994 studies, would be a straight shot here, and it's basically would be impacting South Avenue. This shows this is an air photo. North is toward the top. Again, here is North Avenue, South Avenue here, ending about right there. This shows the current situation with the unsafe bridge curves that are accident clusters, places where there are abnormal number of wrecks and so on. There's a 45-degree turn at this end of the bridge. The bridge is right here. People have difficulty, especially in the winter, making this turn, and so sometimes they plow into this area. This, by the way, is a gas plant, natural gas plant. There's a gas line that goes across the old bridge. And then on the west side, there's a 90-degree turn, and that's probably the biggest accident cluster. Traffic coming from the west will miss that turn and go into the river or go into people that live the property that's just to the north there, or people coming across the bridge this way may go off and into the housing area there. And then here, there's a 90-degree turn where River Pines turns into and heads towards Big Flat, where, again, traffic misses the turn. The Federal Highway Administration and the Montana Department of Transportation, as deciding agencies, not the county, which has been clarified in their various meetings, will determine how to document the National Environmental Policy Act / Montana Environmental Policy Act impacts for the South Avenue Bridge projects. And they have told everyone that they are considering a categorical exclusion. What is a categorical exclusion? It doesn't mean that they're categorically excluding environmental consideration of the project. Rather, it's defined as a determination by the deciding agency as to whether sufficient environmental analyses have already been done so that no new environmental assessment or EIS is required. What do they do as part of that? They look at the studies that have been done to date, which would include the 1994 and the 2013 studies and all the background for information, as well as the new studies that HDR Engineering has done. And they ask questions, the deciding agencies ask questions such as, are there new information or changed conditions present? If there are, then that might argue for doing additional environmental analyses and studies. Did past and current studies cover all the issues, or are there new issues or new concerns that were not considered adequately in the past? And are the impacts of this category of activity, this construction of this bridge, this replacement bridge, similar to the ones that the agencies have experience with? Well, MDT and the Federal Highway Administration obviously have lots of experiences with bridge replacement and construction. And by the way, that consideration is still ongoing. Montana Department of Transportation should be momentarily coming out with their views as to whether or not a categorical exclusion is something that they can go with. So we're waiting for their determination on that. In regard to the funding, the project-specific agreement, which was the funding agreement for the South Avenue Bridge, specified that a South Avenue Bridge would be funded by the Montana Department of Transportation's Federal Off-System Bridge Program, which uses monies from the Federal Highway Trust Fund. That's money that's gathered from gas tax revenues collected on gasoline sales. So anyone putting gas in their car would be paying a tax that would go into this fund. And the state has made clear that if these dollars are not used on the South Avenue Bridge, they'll be allocated and used elsewhere in the state. And the state and the feds have also made it clear that if the county does not use the highway funds for the South Avenue Bridge and decides instead to try to fix up the old bridge, they cannot support that. They do not believe that it would meet standards, and they've said that any rehabilitation of the old bridge would have to be paid for by county taxpayers, probably by a voted mill levy or something on property tax. If Missoula, the funding agreement also, as I said earlier, provides that if Missoula County Commissioners change their mind on the South Avenue Bridge and decide to cancel it, they must repay all of the state and federal funds expended to date on this process, which as of May was around $1 million. The total amount that's been budgeted was $1.4 million. A historic review of bridges at this site shows that there have been bridges at this approximate location since the late 1800s. And the record isn't really clear that I've been able to find out what types of bridges were there, but the record does show that in 1908 it was a mega flood. It may have been a 500-year flood event, and it wiped out bridges not only on the Bitterroot but also on the Clark Fork. And county records don't show what happened between 1908 and 1922, but there are blueprints in the county records that show in 1922 a Maclay Bridge was built at the current site with 2 truss sections and 1 pier. A truss is this open boxwork with cross pieces, and it shows, as I said, 2 sections and 1 pier in the river. And that configuration was present in 1923 when a resident took a picture of the bridge showing it standing there and reported, this is anecdotal evidence, that a flood that year came by and trees and high water knocked the bridge off, one of these trusses, and had to be replaced. So it was damaged that year, but it shows that even then it was too low. Then there's nothing in the record until 1935 when the Forest Service first started shooting air photos in the area. One of their air photos covered this area. Here's South Avenue. Shows it pretty much the same path as it is now. This is Clements. Those are all dirt, gravel roads. Up to north, and here is the Maclay Bridge. If you zoom in on this and look at it at an angle, you can see that it's basically the 1922 vintage bridge with 2 trusses and 1 pier in the middle of the river. In 1948, another huge flood came through and it washed out the entire Maclay Bridge. This is all reported in detail in Missoula County records, the journals of the county commissioners, and also Missoulian. Took out both spans and apparently the piers and abutments. The county started immediately that happened in the spring of 1948. They started in later the summer and fall of 1948 to begin replacing the old bridge, and they let a contract and out for bids. It was obtained by H.B. Berkey and Son, who won the bid. Part of his plan was to use an old Blackfoot bridge that had been abandoned up near Greeno. I think they called it the 9-Mile Prairie Bridge, and to put in new piers and abutments. But that year, the county was hit with a lawsuit. The question was raised as to whether or not the county had the authority to expend funds for rebuilding the bridge. The county was uncertain, and the injunction stopped things. So that time proceeded where that lawsuit put things on hold. Meanwhile, Berkey, a fairly ambitious contractor apparently, went ahead and built an abutment and a pier or 2 in the river. And at the time, the county surveyor and engineer was asked to sign off on his construction of those. He refused. He ended up resigning because he was concerned that the construction of those did not meet proper standards. The county ended up having to hire someone else to approve those designs. But regardless, no bridge installation and construction happened until 1952. This is because in 51 and 52, because time was dragging on and there was no bridge, the ranchers and farmers west of the river, which included one of the Maclays and Clapwick and some other familiar old-time Missoula names, brought suit against the county to force the commissioners to put in a new bridge, and arguing that the county did have authority to spend money on it. Well, the county, this went to court, and the county agreed, based on the new court finding, that they did have enough money budgeted. They had $40,000 to go ahead and proceed with a new bridge. And they again put it up for contract, out for contract for bid. It came up at that time, though, the county attorney pointed out that because Berkey was never paid and he had built the pier and foundation, he owned them. So the county decided that maybe they'd have to deal with Mr. Berkey as the contractor. So he was hired, And he, in 1952, began, and it was completed in 1953, the construction of a bridge at the current site with this configuration, which was basically to use this truss, which came from the Blackfoot. It was dismantled and brought down to the site. And this truss, which there's nothing that I found in the records that says where it came from, but it looks to me from this diagram like perhaps he salvaged it out of the river and that it was a remnant from the old 1922 bridge. But the configuration of the river at the time was such that it was not long enough, so he constructed what was termed a pony truss, a short connecting truss to connect the two pieces. So there are three pieces to the bridge in 1953 when it was completed. And this cross-section shows that the two piers that he put in the river, there's one that looks like it's on a sandbar that just breaks the surface, but this part supporting the pony truss was in deep water, and that's important to note because I'll come back to it later. There were no really clear as-built plans, which are plans that are signed off on by the engineer and the inspecting agency, that exist to confirm the bridge pier support structure. There are some hand-drawn sketches and things that might be, but it's still up in the air, according to the county engineer, as to what exactly these foundation conditions may be like, and that's of concern. Then in 1964, another flood happened, and it damaged that old east bridge truss that I think was probably the 1922 vintage truss. It was replaced by two pre-stressed concrete spans, and to do that, the county had to put in a third pier. And so that resulted in this configuration, which I'm sorry, but it's a different view. It's looking south rather than north, so that the 1952 vintage span that came from up the Blackfoot is on the right here. This is the west bank. This is the pony truss, which was built in 1952, and then here are the two pre-stressed concrete spans here. And an aerial shot of it shows you a little clearer of it. Here are the two pre-stressed concrete spans. Here's the pony truss, and here's the Greeno Blackfoot truss span. You can really see the approaches here, that near 90-degree turn, and part of the 45 here. And going back to zooming out on an air photo, again, I wanted to remind you that Maclay Bridge is on a meander. And meanders are an unstable part of the river at a bad location for bridges because that's where the rivers tend to want to move, is at a meander. And this is, anyone who's floated a river knows that on a meander, the outside of the meander is the deeper and faster part. The inside is slower. As a result, configuration of a river is typically that the outside there's a cut bank and the river is eroding that direction. The inside of the bend is an area of deposition where point bars, where sand is deposited. And meanders move. They cut and move sideways. Well, going back, this is the 1935 air photo. North is to the right. And this shows you where what the Bitter River looked like at that time. This, again, was with the two truss span. There's the one pier that's in the middle of the river. And you can see that just like that cartoon I showed previously, there is a sandbar, a point bar, that's deposited right at this, on the west side of the river. And on this side, you can kind of get a sense that there's a cut bank, a steep part of it. And you can see there's a west channel here and an east channel here flowing around that island. You can also note that the island ends fairly far south to the left of the bridge. There's a little bit of a sand spit that extends down almost to the bridge. If you jump up to 2011, you can see things have changed quite a bit. There's no longer a point bar over here. Instead, I'll show it better in another photo, there's a scour hole that has removed that point bar, and it's actually actively cutting into the bank here and undercutting this west abutment. You should also notice that the island has really extended not only to the bridge but beyond the bridge, and it's becoming covered with vegetation. And there's no longer erosion going on this side the way there was previous to this configuration. Well, why is that? Why did that change? If you go down to the bridge and look, you can quickly see why. The piers are acting to slow the water and to trap sediment and other debris. This is the east approach and abutment. This quite typically happens where trees will pile up against it, sand will pile up in back of them, and vegetation will catch, and that'll further fix the sediment, prevent it from moving. This is the old pony truss. You can see that this pier used to be in deep water. Now there's a big sandbar that extends between the two piers. And here's, this is in the summertime, low flow, but in high water, it extends all the way up to that vegetation, and there's a big whirlpool that develops with counterclockwise flow. The river's flowing from left to right, but this whirlpool develops and swirls around over here and undercuts the bank and the pier there. It causes a deep scour hole under the bridge. Here's an air photo again, which again shows the similar thing. The piers are right here and here, the three piers. You can see where they're blocking the flow of the sediment and causing deposition. And again, you can get a sense of that embayment where the scour hole is cutting here. It's acting, in effect, like a partial dam to slow down the water that used to flow down this east channel, and it's forcing part of the water that used to go down the east channel to go down the west channel. More flow down the west channel, constricted between that concrete abutment there and the concrete pier here, causes turbulence as the water goes through this constriction, and that's what generates whirlpools and turbulence and scouring. So what you have here is unnatural changes to the river. The scour hole, this island and sandbar, and the closing of the east channel. All those are features created by this old bridge and its current configuration. That has implications for public safety and legal, because it's created what attorneys call an attractive nuisance. You can see this young man here. I put an arrow to show him. I stood and watched him as he climbed to the top here and did a bag flip off of the very top of that, hoping, I guess, that he was going to land in a deep part of the river. But this is something that you see every summer out on the bridge. And the concern is that it's a legal liability for the county, because the definition under law is to maintain an artificial structure or condition which poses a known risk of death or injury constitutes an attractive nuisance. And this has already happened to Missoula County at East Missoula with the bridge there, where the case that people may remember where a bridge jumper landed on people who were inner tubing underneath. Well, you can see the very same thing could happen here. Not only are people going under the bridge at danger, but certainly the youngsters jumping off here are at danger of injury and death. And as I said, one of our long-term residents can recount 13 of those types of incidents that happen. There's actually a plaque on the center pier in memory of one of the young men who drowned there. So recap, in 2013, study, the Montana Department of Transportation, Missoula County, listed these as the design and structural issues with Maclay Bridge. It's functionally obsolete and fracture critical. It's not able to handle the capacity currently there as what is projected in the future, and in the future it's projected to about double. The unknown foundation conditions and the scour stability issues, that it would not survive a 100-year flood, that a 100-year flood would take it out, that the curves and approaches violate standards and are accidental clusters, that there are deteriorating concrete and steel beams in the different components of the old bridge. It's now load restricted to 11 tons, which, by the way, is exactly the weight of a loaded school bus, is right at the load limit. And that's of concern because very rarely does a single loaded bus go over. Quite often, especially if you have to wait to cross, cars will back up. Sometimes school buses will back up, and we've witnessed 2 school buses or a school bus and several cars going across at the same time. It's also load restricted that some fire trucks of a certain weight can't use the bridge, or if in special circumstances they use it, the county requires them to go 5 miles per hour, go in the center of it, and they can't return the same way. If they go over, they can't return that same way, but that's only in emergency conditions. So the load limit, which is bound to decrease over time as the bridge further deteriorates. Here are some photos showing some of the conditions of the bridge. This is the joint between the 2 pre-stressed concrete sections. You can see that the concrete is deteriorating. This is the exposed natural gas pipeline that goes from that gas plant across it. So if the bridge did fail, you'd have a broken gas line. This shows one of the rotated junctions between the 2. It was rather interesting that to support this part of the bridge, someone drove in a wooden wedge under it. That doesn't seem proper engineering, but there's a wooden shim driven in under that east span. There's lots of cracking in the center bridge pier. There is spalled concrete and exposed rusted rebar that you can observe under the bridge. In the old Blackfoot Greeno span, there's lots of corroded steel beams and the bolts, which you're looking up at the bottom of the deck. The bolts are rusted. That's what holds the decking on. You can also see that there are several generations of steel there. It's been repaired and replaced a number of times, so there's steel of varying ages and conditions. So the point needs to be made that well-designed bridges do not create scour holes in sandbar recreation sites like Maclay Bridge. Maclay Bridge, I like to point out, is not a case where an engineered bridge was designed to fit a river. Instead, because of cost constraints and what spare parts were available, they tried to make the river fit the bridge that they had at the time. But if you look around Missoula at other bridges, you see something like Kona Ranch. There's no sandbar, no scour hole there. Even in East Missoula, where the accident happened, the recreation site's actually in back of it there at the Meander site, but there are no sandbars or scour holes of note. Madison Street Bridge, the same thing. There's no sandbar or scour hole. Higgins Avenue Bridge, similar. Orange Street, similar. So, going back to where I began, this is actually a view of the proposed crossing at South Avenue of the river looking toward the west. Both the 1994 and the 2013 environmental studies found that South Avenue is the preferred site for a new bridge. It's a straight and shallow part of the river channel. At maximum, I waded across here. It was about 3 or 4 feet deep at that time, so it's far too shallow for young people to be attracted to jumping off a bridge into that shallow water. It would mean there would be road approaches with no curves that would be accident clusters. To date, from the environmental analyses, there would be likely little effects on the river, and it's actually a narrower part of the floodway. The floodway is the channel, river channel, where a 100-year flood might occur. This is confirmed by mapping that HDR Engineering did in 2016. They updated previous studies, and these red lines here show how HDR has mapped the floodway. And north is toward the top. I know it's a little hard to see the images, but here is where Maclay Bridge crosses and then goes this way. And you can see HDR shows the floodway as being very wide there. This narrow part here is where the South Avenue Bridge would cross the floodway. To further consider the opponents to the South Avenue Bridge's issues with the new bridge and their insistence that rehabilitation of the old bridge is feasible, HDR Engineering was asked to, for the 3rd time, reconsider a rehabilitation option but it had to meet state and federal standards. This is ignoring potential environmental effects as well as capacity and other issues. HDR's analysis said to keep the bridge at the current site and alignment and ignoring capacity and everything else, at minimum we'd have to straighten out these curves to eliminate the accident safety cluster, or the accident clusters and the safety issues. That would mean this house here, the part of it at least, probably the whole house, would have to be removed. On this side, to do away with that 90-degree turn, there would have to be a wider approach. That would take out 4 or 5 houses, maybe more on this side. So 5 to 6 homes would be impacted and have to be removed to consider rehabilitation of the old bridge. And as I said, that's aside from all the other problems with that site, environmental and capacity and so on. So, additional facts from that 2013 Montana Department of Transportation and County Travel Study, or Planning Study. They point out South Avenue is already a major east-west travel route, so this would just extend that and be part of that. 5 neighborhoods in target range are being unnecessarily impacted by current bridge traffic. To do away with the current bridge would reduce traffic on all 5 of those, and as a result, traffic would decrease in most of target range, and safety issues would be reduced. There'd be no bypass created. This has been a concern that many people have voiced. There's been a misunderstanding that somehow a new bridge would attract traffic from somewhere, although it's not clear where this traffic would be coming from. But the modeling and the evaluation that the agencies have done show that that's not true. The traffic would actually decrease on Blue Mountain Road with the South Avenue Bridge. Again, a South Avenue Bridge would do away with that jog to the north of a half mile, so there'd be less fuel and greenhouse gases produced, particularly over time, because the old bridge causes half-mile out-of-line traffic per trip. At 2,600 vehicles per day, that's 1,300 miles per day out of lane travel. That calculates to 474,500 miles per year, which further calculates to about 24,000 gallons of gas that's wasted by that current configuration. More facts. Again, the old bridge was not designed for the site. It's a spare part of an old abandoned bridge on the Blackfoot. Bridges have failed at this site repeatedly, showing it's not a very good site for a bridge. It has impacted the river channel and floodplain unnaturally with the scour hole and channel narrowing. We have 2 independent studies, now a 3rd one about to be completed, that support the selection of the current South Avenue Bridge site as being the best one. Repairing the old bridge site, if the county commissioners would for some reason decide to do that, would require new county taxes. Every taxpayer in the county would have to pay it, including Missoula City residents, and it would still violate safety standards for the curves unless you took out those 5 or 6 homes. And if it is repaired, it still leaves 2,610 vehicles per day on a single-lane bridge with a maximum capacity of 100 vehicles per day. Will a new bridge create a bypass? Well, as I said, Missoula County Planning and MDT firmly deny that there are any plans for a north-south or an east-west bypass in the area. The state-of-the-art computer modeling that was done in the 2013 study showed that a new bridge would not attract traffic from Highway 93, Mullen Road, or anywhere else. The main use is for the Forest Service, people living on Big Flat and up O'Brien Creek to access to and from Missoula. Particularly for the Forest Service, if there are future wildfires on Blue Mountain or elsewhere, it would be a means of escape of people getting out of that area. If without the new bridge, there would likely be a jam up, especially if the Maclay Bridge was under repair, and people would have to go all the way out to Buckhouse Bridge or Kona Bridge. So for safety, a new bridge would help in fire situation. Further on the bypass, this is an air photo with Highway 93 is here, and this is Reserve Street. This is South Avenue. It shows that the current route that traffic follows is on the blue line here, comes here to the junction with Reserve, and traffic wanting to go north goes on Reserve and continues on up to I-90. That's about 2.8 miles from here, this turnoff, which is the light by the fitness center. If people, for some reason, wanted to take this other as a, quote, bypass, that would be this red line, which goes up here by Blue Mountain, follows along through here, between the ditch and the river, up here to the junction with Big Flat and River Pines Road, jogs back, comes across the river, and all the way back here on South Avenue, bringing you right back to the South Avenue and Reserve Junction, which is often a very clogged intersection. That red route is 6.3 miles, over twice as far as the current route, 2.8 miles, so it just doesn't make sense that somehow that's going to create a bypass from Highway 93. It's important to emphasize that this is a county-wide issue. It's not just a neighborhood issue, since everyone in the county is going to pay for any Maclay Bridge rehabilitation or reimbursement rather, of funds should the project be canceled. And in 2015, the Missoulian conducted an online countywide poll of residents. 56% of 946 votes were in favor of a new South Avenue Bridge. And it's important to note that that was without it being well known at the time about this $1.4 million reimbursement clause, or it being well known that the state and the feds would not pay for rehabilitation of the old bridge. So those are important points regarding public opinion. In closing, a new bridge would help people living in the area, because we quite often suffer power outages in the winter due to crashes on that stretch of River Pines Road. Because it's such a narrow roadway, the power poles are located right in the edge of the pavement. There's no berm there. So besides people crashing at the curves, they quite often take out power poles, and people in the area lose power at the time. The drownings I've mentioned and accidents that have happened are a big safety concern. The environmental impacts to the river should be of concern to anyone who's concerned about effects on rivers in the area and restoring them to their proper flowing condition. The deterioration of the current bridge conditions are all points that argue in favor of the science. The science is clear. It's time for a new bridge at South Avenue. Thank you.